those of you who haven't yet met Chris, and you're going to absolutely love him to bits as I do, Chris is an absolute sales master. Chris, now having mastered these sales things, helps entrepreneurs, business owners, basically awesome people who've wanting to add value. He teaches them how to actually have sales conversations, how to communicate, how to absolutely get clear on what they're communicating to enable people to buy from them, to really make those choices, but do it in a way that feels so empowering and supportive. Okay, so Chris, I am going to shut up and hand over to you because there's just so much juicy gems. Over to you, the amazing Chris Kenney.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. All right, and what you just said is totally accurate. You talked about the negative beliefs that people have about selling. You talked about how people can sometimes feel icky with it, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, because a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is attached to that whole mindset piece, because it does have such a massive impact on people's ability to show up and actually sell services and create the impact that they want to create on the world. So when I woke up this morning, I found myself somewhat emotional. It was really interesting. And I think that comes from, for me, it comes from the knowing that I'm going to teach today. And it comes from the knowing that if all of you that are present, if you pay attention, if you take notes and you implement this teaching, I know what it can do for you. I know what it can do for your life, and what you can do for your business, and what it can do for the impact on the world, because it's so much bigger than us, isn't it? It's all about the impact that we can create on the world when we show up and we sell our services. So today's conversation is really, it's bigger than selling. It's really about how do we achieve sales mastery so we can go out and create a massive impact on the world. That's where we're coming from as we dive in. So what I'm going to do is I am going to turn my video off, and I'm going to start the presentation. There we go. So we're going to begin with a definition of sales mastery. Sales mastery lets you enjoy the freedom that comes from knowing how to close sales wherever you are, anytime, anywhere, with ease, no matter what your starting point. I want you to imagine for a second, you get on an airplane, you're traveling, you strike up a conversation with the person next to you, and that person ends up being your next 25K client. I want you to imagine you're hanging out by the pool, you're on vacation, and you meet somebody while you're sitting by the pool, and that person hires you for 12 months of work. I want you to imagine that you're hopping on a follow-up call with a potential client. This potential client comes to the call as a no. They've already made up their mind not to work with you, but because you've achieved sales mastery, you know what questions to ask, you know how to navigate that situation, and you're able to naturally move that individual or those individuals from no's to yeses. That's what can happen when you have sales mastery. I've done this. I was on a plane last year from Tucson to Phoenix. I was literally on a 30-minute flight, and I met somebody sitting next to me. A week later, that person hired me for $25,000. Last year, I was also sitting by that very pool in Bali, all the way across the world, met a guy in a retreat there, and that person hired me for 12 months. And then in terms of the follow-up, the last 3 clients that have come into my business came to the call as a no, and then I asked the right questions, and I was able to move them to a yes. And that brought in an additional $83,000 into my business. Now, I don't want you to get tied up in the numbers here, because this isn't about the number. It's not about 25,000 or 50,000 or 10,000. It doesn't really matter what your price points are. You could be charging $100. You could be charging $500, 5,000 or 50,000. It really doesn't matter. What matters is that sales mastery is achieved. And I want to tell each and every one of you that you can do this. if I could figure this out, you can figure this out. When I get to my story, you'll see where I come from in this area. But I just want you to know that if I can do it, so too can you. So when you achieve sales mastery, one of the things that really happens is there's this massive amount of freedom that's created. And that's kind of what I'm feeling. It's what a lot of my clients are feeling. They know that they have the ability to go, show up, meet people, and close business. But that's not what I'm seeing in the entrepreneurial world. And what I want to do is I want to just pop onto video here for a second and just talk about this for a second. What I'm about to share is just so incredibly important. And I want you to make sure that you write it down. To me, it's probably one of the biggest mistakes that I see in business in terms of business model. And it's something that I see taking people completely out of business. It's so incredibly sad. And so that's why I'm coming on here, and I want to just look at you and I want to just say, really write this down, really pay attention to this. So what I want to show you first is I can pop off here. I want to talk about something that might look familiar to a lot of you. This is a traditional marketing funnel. And if you start at the top of the funnel, you've got a free offer. That might be something on your website. It might be an opt-in where you get, somebody gets a free report, or they get a PDF or a free audio, something like that. They opt in. And then if they upgrade, maybe they get a low-level offer, something you might sell for $47 or $97. And then as they continue down through your funnel, maybe they buy your signature system, which might be the way of which you navigate a person from point A to point B. And then if they really love that, they might hop into one of your group programs, which is just that, a bunch of people in a group paying an investment to do some work with you. And then when they get all the way down to the bottom of the funnel, you might end up with a high-paying client. And what I see this creating is just such an incredible amount of frustration, because it's so difficult to move a person down from the top of the funnel to the point where they might actually become a one-to-one client. There's so many different things that have to happen. It can be incredibly slow. It can be incredibly painful. And oftentimes during this period of time, there's very little, if any, income being created for the company. And I see entrepreneurs getting stuck in this funnel. And as I said earlier, it takes them completely out of business. So what I want to do right now is show you the sales mastery way. There is another way to do this. Here's what I call the money mountain. What I've done is we've turned the funnel completely upside down. And if you start at the top of the money mountain, you've got active income at the top. And that's the income where you're working with your one-to-one clients. It involves you, you're interacting with them. And then as we continue down the mountain, now you've got your leveraged income. That might be your group program. And then as we continue down, you've got your signature system, which again is how you might navigate a person from point A to point B. And your signature system and your low-level offer can turn into passive income streams, because they can come to your website, they can buy your low-level offer. If you've recorded your signature system, they can purchase that there. But here's the problem. This is the golden nugget of this, and this is where people get tied up. The mistake that is being made here is that most people are trying to build the mountain from the bottom up. They are trying to create the passive income first, and they get stuck at the bottom. And they get stuck in the low-level offers. They spend tons of time, they spend tons of money, they spend tons of energy trying to sort that piece out. Now, I'm not here to say that passive income doesn't have a place, but oh my gosh, if you try to build it first, it's so incredibly difficult to do. The key is to work the mountain from the top down. You generate the active income first. So say you enroll 5 clients. You enroll 5 clients. You're working with them one-to-one in some sense. And then maybe you have five different topics that you're working with them on, 5 really common, problems or challenges that your current clients are running into. You take each one of those problems or challenges and you create a module around them. Those modules become your group program. And then you record your group program. We're just going to continue down the mountain. You record the doing of your group program, and that becomes your signature system. And then you take one small component out of your signature system, and that turns into your low-level offer. When you work it this way, the whole entire mountain gets built almost just organically. And the beautiful thing is that while it's being built, income is being generated. Income is coming into the company. And that's essentially what we need. And sales mastery gives you the ability to build the active income first. And that's what we want. There's several good characteristics regarding sales mastery. It relies on you. There's no extra stuff. There's no complicated funnels. There's no marketing copy. You can get an instant result. In my opinion, it is the fastest path to accelerated income. I want to take you back a few years ago in my life because it really ties into what I'm talking about here. 3 years ago, I had to start completely over. I had to rebrand. I was in another business and I was dating my business partner. And her and I dated. We dated for 8 years. We made the decision to split amicably. And it was difficult, but I'll tell you something. I was starting right over from scratch. I had no clients. I had to completely rebrand. And I also had to navigate the breakup because, my gosh, it was an 8-year relationship. So it was a tough situation to be in. But here's what happened. I want to share what took place. In the first year, in the first year of business, I generated over $300,000 with no website, with no business card, with no marketing funnel, and with no social media. What I did do was I showed up at live events where my potential clients were, where my target market was, and I engaged in conversations with another human being. And I sold my stuff. I sold my services. It really is that simple. I think at times we can make this so incredibly difficult, but that's all I did. I went to self-development events where I knew people were interested in self-development. I went there and I interacted, had conversations, and brought people into my business. So because I have that skill set, that's why I have the freedom that comes from knowing how to close sales wherever I am, anytime, anywhere with ease. That's why that happens. So this has a lot of benefit, and it has benefit to myself, but I want to talk about what happens for my clients, because I teach my clients to money mountain the way I just taught you. I teach them how to do effective enrollment, and they're creating fast results. So what I decided to do in prep for this masterclass was talk to my clients. And I said, you know what, let's talk about income. How much have you brought in? And I talked to all my clients, and in the past 7 months alone, my clients have generated $1.2 million in sales. And I feel really, really good about that. So going back a little bit to when I was first thinking of starting my business, I heard something that I found to be incredibly life-changing. And it's the real reason why I do this work. And I think what I want to do is I want to put myself a camera here. So hang on 1 second. I'm going to turn the video on. And here's what was going on. At that time in corporate America, And I was contemplating starting a business, and I was literally sitting at the computer, and I was a bit freaked out. I was really in my shit about, wow, do I want to start a business? Shouldn't I start a business? Am I good enough? Will people really pay me? I didn't feel worth it at that particular time. So I was really a bit freaked out by it. And I was online and I was looking for inspiration, and I found a speaker by the name of Les Brown. And that's Les. Hello, Les. And Les was given this talk, and I listened to him, and what he said was something that I won't forget. So he said, it sounds morbid, but just stay with me for a minute. He said, imagine you're on your deathbed, and while you're on your deathbed, around the bed, there's one spirit for every single unfulfilled dream of your life. So there's all these spirits around you, and they're looking down on you, and they're saying, we came to you to bring us life. But because maybe you were too afraid, or maybe you didn't think you were worth it, or maybe you didn't think you were enough, or you were never willing to step fully in, now we must die with you. And I saw that and I went, oh my God, I'm on that trajectory. That's me. That's my life. And then he went on to say that the richest places in the world, the richest place in the world, they're not the oil refineries, they're not the gold mines. He said the richest place in the world is the graveyard, because that's where most people take their dreams. And I went, oh my gosh. And it just hit me to the core of my being. And what became present for me was I realized that everybody has these massive gifts inside of them. And my main goal is not to let people have their dreams die in them. That's why I do what I do. That's why I show up. That's why I teach sales mastery, because I know that if the skill set isn't learned, people run the risk of having their dreams die inside them. It's easy to think that you've heard stories, I've closed, big contracts by the pool, and I've closed them on the plane. And it might be easy to think that I was born like that. And I want to just take you back a little bit. I want to keep it real in terms of where I come from and how I kind of ended up here. So I got hired in a sales job. This was, 15 years ago. And I'd never sold before. And this, if you look at the guy under the desk, that was me when it was time to go out and sell. And some of you might feel a similar way about selling, and we're going to do some work on that in the future slides. So that was me. I really wanted to just crawl under the desk. I was really scared of it, uncomfortable with it, thought it was pushy. Made me so uncomfortable. I'd be in my car, sitting in my car, not really doing the work that I was supposed to do. It got as bad as I would when I was pulling into these businesses, I was like, well, you know what? I wish I could just throw my cards out the window. Then I could tell my boss I dropped off my cards. I didn't want to sell. And here I was in a sales job. I'm thinking, how the heck did I end up here? Right? So one thing that took place, and I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to put myself on video. This was one of the more memorable things that's happened to me when I was out selling. I made this decision that if I drank a lot of coffee, I thought for some reason it would actually help me relax. And so that's what I started doing. I drink like 3 lattes, right? And then, so I drank a few lattes, and then I went to meet with a potential client. And we sat down at the table, and she's sitting kind of kitty corner. So I'm here, and, potential clients right here. And I start talking, and right at the beginning, because I'd had so much caffeine, I was really salivating. And what happened was spit just, I watched in horror as spit just kind of flew out of my mouth. And quite unfortunately, it hit my potential client right square on the forehead. And I was sitting there like in horror, because it seemed like the spit just kind of flew across in like super slow motion and then just landed And I don't know, I think we've all had the experience where somebody has spit on us while they were talking. And for me, like when that happens, I usually wait for the person to look away and then I just go, okay, let me get rid of that. That wasn't great. But what this person did instead was she literally froze, stopped, looked me straight in the face and went like this and just wiped it off. And I was absolutely, I'm sitting there and I'm absolutely horrified. And what happened next actually made it slightly worse. It was one of those moments, I think we've all had these moments where we probably shouldn't say anything and it's really tense, but we feel like we should say something because it was what just happened was pretty terrible. So it was one of those moments where I said something so wrong just to have something to say. What I was thinking was, shit happens. Well, what came out of my mouth was spit happens. And quite unfortunately, she didn't think that was funny at all. She didn't laugh at the joke. I remember just sitting there in puddles of sweat trying to survive this. So needless to say, no sale was made on that particular day. And as I continued on with the job, it really wasn't getting any easier. My boss was really in my grill. I wasn't doing well. My numbers were horrible. So I was at risk of losing my job. That's where I landed. So at that moment, I really knew something had to shift. And I had to shift my mindset, first of all, and that was how I was viewing sales. I had to shift my skill set, which meant I had to come up with a way to conduct sales conversations in an authentic, non-pushy way, but still in a way that created the results that I needed. I knew I had to get into action, and I also had to practice. So those became the 3 pillars of sales mastery. And I want you to write those down. The 3 pillars of sales mastery are mindset, skill set, and then get in action and practice. Here's what happened when I implemented this work. I started to really enjoy selling. My numbers skyrocketed, so much in fact that I actually hit this threshold called Circle of Excellence. And it put me as one of the top sales reps in the company. And then what happened was I was then no longer motivated. Once I hit that goal, I said, well, what else is there? I'm here, I'm at this company, I'm selling payroll services, I'm not really loving it. So that's when I heard Les Brown, and I made the decision to go out and start teaching this framework to other business owners. So that's how I ended up here. Let's talk about your path to sales mastery. You just heard about my path and how this was all created. Let's talk about your path to sales mastery. Here again, we've got your 3 pillars. You've got mindset, skill set, and get into action. The first shift, this is incredibly important, that needs to happen is mindset. I call this the unseen things that take place in every sales conversation. These are the things that are under the surface, and I like to see it, as you can see on the screen, I see it as an iceberg. This is the stuff that's going on under the water, in the mind. Usually nobody's talking about these things, but these things are creating an enormous influence on the conversation. To me, the truth is, unless this piece is in place first as the foundation of every single sales conversation you have, it doesn't matter how many skills you have in terms of knowing what to say, the energy of your mindset will always impact your results. It's so incredibly important. You'll notice that the mindset is the whole entire foundation of sales mastery. Without this firmly in place, nothing else is going to flow right in the conversation. Which is exactly why today we're going to dive deep into this on today's masterclass. I'm going to show you some really practical ways to shift your mindset to the correct focus for sales mastery. Now, before I go into that, what I want to do is I want to glance at the other 2 pillars and let you know what's involved there, just so we're clear on what it is that we're talking about. The second pillar of sales mastery is skill set. This is the seen part. of the sales process. It's the bit of the iceberg that's above the water. This is what actually takes place between you and your potential client in terms of the conversation that you have. It's the words you say. It's how you say them. It's how you lead the conversation between you and your potential client. Now let's move into skill set. For true sales mastery, the skill set you need to learn and master is an effective framework that has a prospect lead themselves to a natural yes, just like the examples I was giving earlier, like by the pool and on the follow-up calls. We're just going to graze the surface of this pillar of sales mastery in today's masterclass because I want to dive deep into the foundational mindset piece so that we set you up for success regarding your sales mastery. There's great news though. Anne has asked me to host a 90-minute in-depth training next Tuesday, the 28th of August at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 6 p.m. UK, 7 p.m. Central Africa time. And during that session, we're going to dive deep into the aspect of skill set. And we're going to cover something I call your sales mastery blueprint, which is the 5 key steps to an effective enrollment conversation. It's something you can start using straight away in your business. So mark it on your calendar now. Be sure to join us. We'd love to see you there. We're going to post a link so that you can register right in the chat. And if you want to go ahead and register now, you can do that. The URL for it is www.mysalessuccess.com. When you land on the page, you'll see the register now button on the bottom right-hand corner. Just simply put your name and email in, and you will be in for the webinar. What you're going to leave that with, again, is a 5-step sales mastery blueprint, something you can use on your very next sales conversation. So I'm looking forward to leading that. Really excited. All right, let's recap. We've got the 2 pillars that we've talked about so far. We've got mindset and we've got skill set. Both of these pieces are incredibly essential. The mindset is the unseen. The skill set is the seen. Let's talk briefly about this final component here, get in action. That means to really achieve sales mastery, you have to go out and you have to practice. This is just like any other skill set. You have to go out, you have to get in the game, you've got to practice and then correct and continue as you're traveling the journey. As a matter of fact, here's what we're going to do. Because we're here on Anne's invitation, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to change the wording of this 3rd pillar to something that really hits home. Here's what the 3rd pillar is really about. Get off your asset. Yes, you've got to get off the sidelines and go out and get into the game and practice. And it is all about getting off your asset. Sales mastery will only happen if you're willing to go out and practice. And one of my favorite wealth individuals, Mr. T. Harbecker, he's the author of The Secrets of the Millionaire Mind. He lets us know that your income can only grow to the extent that you do. And I've heard Anne say this quite often. You are your number 1 asset. And that's what happens when you start to achieve sales mastery. You become an asset in your business because you have the ability to go and close sales. So let's dive in. Let's talk more about this first pillar of mindset. When we think of mindset, there's 2 components at play that we're going to talk about on this masterclass. 2 components. Number 1, there's you. And that is made up of, for example, here's a few things. Your view of sales and salespeople. Your feelings and beliefs about asking for money. Your belief about how much people will pay you. How you show up to the sales conversation. The intention you have for the sales conversation. When I created this slide, what I was very aware of is I could probably list about 100 different items on this sheet of paper, but I don't want to create overwhelm. These are just a few things that are in play. And some of you, as you're reading them, you're going, oh yeah, that comes in, doesn't it? and nobody's talking about it. So it's like, let's talk about it. All right. Then we've got your potential client. Your potential client's view of sales and salespeople, that plays a role. Your potential client's previous experience of being sold to, that plays a role. Your potential client's belief about what they want to buy, that's in the equation. Your potential client's reasons for buying from you. Your potential client's emotional energy when they come to the sales conversation. These are just some of the things that play even before you open your mouth in a sales conversation. Not addressing these will impact your sales conversations, and yes, it will impact your results. Unless we put our attention here, the unseen will be the thing that creates your results in every single sales conversation you have. Learning a script is not enough, because what's under the surface in the unseen is the whole foundation of the conversation. When I work with clients, mindset and the unseen is always, always, always what we look at first, because the unseen is the thing that sets up the whole entire foundation for the conversation and for sales mastery. We have to look at the whole picture. Here's one of my clients, Sherry. Here's what Sherry said. Working with Chris has been a complete renovation of my brain. I'm attracting my ideal clients, launching lucrative life-changing programs, and surpassing financial goals that I previously thought impossible. When I first started working with Sherry, she wasn't making a lot of money, and she was tired. She was frustrated because she was putting in a ton of hours. She was keeping very busy, yet no matter what she tried, there was no income coming in. One of the first things that I taught Sherry, and we're going to start here with today, is a fundamental law. It's a way of thinking that I use not only in business, but everywhere in my life. This was the first thing I talked with Sherry about, and it has to do with how you show up in the conversation. The fundamental law, the universal law that I'm going to teach you right now is called the Law of Polarity. So I'm going to teach you this law, and then we're going to talk about how it shows up and why it's important when we're talking about sales and sales mastery. Here's what the universal law says. The Law of Polarity says everything in the universe has an opposite, and it exists at the same time. I'm going to say that again. Everything in the universe has an opposite, and it exists at the same time. You can't have black without white, for example. If you look at the page that's in front of you, it has a front and a back. What if I was to say to you, can you throw away only the front? What would your answer be? Can you throw away only the front? Absolutely not. What else do you have to do? Well, you have to throw away the back. Why? Because you can't have front without back, because everything in the universe has an opposite and it exists at the same time. Let's glance at this line. This line has a left and it has a right. If I were to say to you, go ahead and cover up the left, you'd probably cover it up, look something like that. But if you look at the remaining line, does it still have a left? Yes, it does, doesn't it? So I say, go ahead, cover up the left. So you cover up a little more. Does the remaining line still have a left? Yes, it does. If that line shrunk, if you covered all of it up down to 1 millimeter, that line would still have a left and a right. What's the only way to cover up left? Well, it's to also cover up right, because you can't have left without right, because everything in the universe has an opposite and it exists at the same time. Now, that being said, let's move into some application of this. If you look at this line, the left side of the line there, the P, the letter P stands for problem. And if everything in the universe has an opposite and exists at the same time, if a problem is present, what else is present? The solution. If the problem is here, the solution is present. It has to be. And not only is it present, but it's present right now. It's in your experience right now. So how can we use this? How can we use this fundamental truth? And I want to say I use this really in all areas of my life. I want to share a quick story with you. Really recently, Kate and I have been doing a whole heck of a lot of exercising because we are getting married in October, and we're doing this wonderful wedding in Italy, so we want to be really, really fit. So I've been doing a lot of running and dropping a little bit of weight. And well, I have an issue with my left foot. I've got plantar fasciitis in my left foot, and Kate had injured her calf, her left calf. So what we wanted was a way that we could actually soak our feet without having to completely fill up the bathtub, because it takes a long time to fill up our tub. So I thought to myself immediately, well, if the problem's present, the solution's present. Where's the solution? So now I go down into the basement in the house and I'm like, where's the solution? The solution has to be here. What I found was this cooler. And so I brought this cooler up. It was, really, really deep, So I put the cooler in the sink. I filled the cooler up with incredibly hot water and Epsom salt. The cooler was on wheels. I rolled it into the living room, and we sat in our lounge right behind us, right, with our feet, both of us, our feet in this cooler, soaking our feet, watching a television program. And that happened because that's how I approach the world. If the problem's present, so is the solution. You just have to be willing to go out and fully look for it. So what does this mean for you? What does it mean when it comes to your selling? Let's dive into that. What this really means is if you have a goal or an aim, if you have a goal, an aim, an intention, if this law is true, and it is, that means the way to achieve that goal, the way to achieve that intention is present right now. It's here. So how do we go about using that? Let me give you an example. I have a client I've been working with recently, and about a month ago, we were taking a look at her schedule, and she was incredibly concerned because she had some travel plans coming up, which meant she was going to be away from her business for almost 2 entire weeks, and she was actually going to visit. It was a personal development event. And she was feeling a little bit guilty because she felt like she wouldn't be able to prospect for new clients. So right then and there, what I invited her to do was set a clear intention for the event she was attending. And the intention she set was to meet potential clients in the room. She set the goal of setting up 5 meetings with potential clients with the people that were at this event. And she entered that event with the knowing, the understanding of the universal law that if I set this intention, the way to fulfill the intention is here in the room. And she showed up with that goal of 5. What ended up happening was she booked 7 sales conversations. And most recently, one of those 7 just bought a $5,000 program from her. The great thing about this is this works anywhere you are. When I think about what is the foundational thing that causes me to be able to go to places wherever I am and sell, the first thing that I do is I set an intention. I set an intention around potential client meetings. And then I know when I show up, the way to fulfill that intention is present. That affects how I show up. That affected how this particular client showed up, and the end result was a new client. This can work if you're sitting by a pool. It can work if you're riding on a plane. It can work if you're on the beach. It can work if you're at a live event. Let's recap this. Know and understand the law of polarity. If the problem is present, so too is the solution. Using the law of polarity, set a clear intention for every meeting or event or trip you take. It is a huge mistake to show up to networking experiences without a concrete intention. And I usually go a little bit further than that. I will set 2 different ones. I will set an intention for myself, and I will set an intention for business. An example of an intention I would set for myself might be, I'm going to show up to this event like the powerful leader that I am. That's a self-intention. And then I'll usually set a very specific intention for business. And that might be, I'm going to set up 3 meetings with potential clients that are in this room. And then what I do is, while I'm working that event, while I'm there, I'm checking in with myself to see if my behavior, to see if my way of being is in alignment with my intention. This keeps me conscious, it keeps me focused on the goal, and I'm also entering knowing that because I set the goal, the way to achieve the goal is present. So why does this work? I want to give a little bit of teaching on why this actually works. We don't see the world through our eyes. Let me explain that. We actually see the world through the lens of our beliefs. If you look at this diagram, let's look at the circle first. The circle represents the mind. The C at the top of the circle is the conscious mind. So write that in, that's the conscious. The S, like Sam at the bottom there, that's the subconscious. Our beliefs reside in our subconscious. Now, what I want you to notice is this. We don't see with our eyes, write this down, we don't see with our eyes, we see through our eyes, but with our brain. We see through our eyes, but with our brain. And if we are viewing a room, for example, a networking experience with a negative belief about it, oh, there might not be clients here, or people here probably can't afford my services, or people here probably won't pay me for what it is that I do. If you have a negative belief sitting in the subconscious about the networking experience, what then happens is we end up creating circumstances, environment, and results that align with that particular belief. When you enter with the law of polarity in mind, you know that if you set a goal in a room, the way to achieve the goal is present. It's there. And that can shift the belief in the subconscious mind. Oftentimes, the room isn't the problem. The rooms we're showing up in are not the problem. The problem is the beliefs that we're taking into the rooms. And that's what we need to shift. Let's move on. Let's move to the next mindset piece that can show up in a sales conversation. Just move this slide here. On this one, we're going to look at 2 different things. We're going to look at the goal or intention you set for the sales conversation. And we're going to look at your potential client's previous experience of being sold to. Both of these items, again, are unseen. Both have an impact in the conversation you're going to have with your potential client. What we're going to do right now is look at the second one first. And that is going to involve us playing a game just for a second. So I'm popping the video back on. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to play a word association game. Here's what I want you to do. I'm going to say a word, and as soon as I say the word, what I want you to do is I want you to write in the chat the first word that comes to your mind. All right? So just write the first word that comes to your mind. I'm about to say the word. Here comes the word. The word is salesperson. Write the first thing that comes to your mind when I say the word salesperson, and go ahead and post that in the chat. Let's see, avoid. What else? What else comes to mind when I say the word salesperson? Sleazy, legend, cheesy. Yes. Slimy. Yes. These are really, really common responses. And again, if we're concerned about that, if we're concerned in showing up in a way that's sleazy, right? Isn't that going to affect how we show up? It certainly will, without question. So let's pop this back off here and continue in the presentation. Everybody's had an experience, I think, at some point in time with this person. If your potential client has had an experience with somebody like this, if they've had bad experiences of being sold to or sold something that didn't fulfill a promise, that's in play here. Remember, we're not just sitting down with a person here. We're sitting down with all that person's perceptions of being sold to. Therefore, the people we're sitting down with are naturally cautious and a little bit guarded. So one of the absolute keys to achieving sales mastery is to break through this unseen barrier before you start. And there's a very simple way that you can do that. And I feel like it's something that a lot of people dramatically mess up. And this has to do with what the goal is of any sales conversation. Most people think that the goal of any sales conversation is to make a sale. And I vehemently disagree with that. Here's what the goal is of any sales conversation. The goal of any sales conversation is clarity. The goal is clarity. We're simply trying to help a person become clear. Clear that it's a yes to working with us, or clear that it's a no. Now, if you're able to achieve your goal of clarity in the sales conversation, it's quite possible that your client will lead themselves to a natural yes. I want you to just take a second and feel into what it feels like to be able to approach sales conversations with a goal of clarity. For me, that feels incredibly different. It feels better. It feels more it takes the pressure off, and we're going to talk more about that. It feels completely different. And what I want to do is I want to give you something really practical that you can take away from this masterclass and implement right away that will help you establish the goal of clarity very clearly with your potential client. And the way that it's done is through setting an agenda. Set an agenda for the meeting. Every good meeting has an agenda. Right at the top of the meeting, you want to have an agenda before you go into the actual sales conversation. Here's what should be in the agenda. Number one, how long the meeting is going to be. I think we've all had situations where we've gotten in really uncomfortable sales conversations with someone selling to us, and they're just droning on and on and on and on and on and on. So people are bringing that to your sales conversation. They want to know how long the meeting's going to be. So let them know that at the top of your agenda. The next thing is where you're taking them during the conversation. Like, what are you going to do? So they know. It's very, very powerful. The next thing you want to do is what's the goal of the meeting? You want that in the agenda. And then the final component of the agenda, and I'm going to give you an example here in a minute, is you want to establish agreement regarding the agenda. So here's a sample agenda, and I'm going to go through this really slowly so you all have the opportunity to write it down. But that being said, what I want you to do is I want you to follow this format, the format that I went through here, right? Here's what you want in it, how long it's going to be, where you're taking them during the conversation, the goal, and an agreement from them. That's the format. And then what I want you to do is essentially put yourself into that format. Here are the words that I might use, but feel free to put this in your words. Hi, and then insert the first name of the person. Thank you for taking the time to meet with me. The next component, in the next 45 minutes together, I hope to learn a little more about your business and any challenges you may be having. And you'll notice as this slide changes, the previous bullet is still up on the screen, so you can capture these kind of at your own pace. I'll say that again. In the next 45 minutes together, I hope to learn a little more about your business and any challenges you may be having. Third component, based on our conversation, I'll give you some recommendations. And by the end of our time here today, my intention is for us to become clear about whether it might be a fit for us to work together or not. I'll say that again. And by the end of our time here today, my intention is for both of us to become clear about whether it might be a fit for us to work together or not. And then finally, how does that sound? We always want to establish agreement. They'll say, wow, that sounds great. Always remember this. Write this down. Selling is not about confrontation. It's about agreement. Selling is not about confrontation. It's about agreement. You've just established your first agreement in the sales conversation. I want you to take a second, and I want you to imagine, put myself back on video here. I want you to imagine you're sitting down in an enrollment conversation, and the person that you're sitting down with has just put that agenda in front of you. They've said the goal is clarity. They've indicated the time that they're going to spend. They've indicated where they're taking you in the conversation. And the goal, again, is clarity. What I want you to post in the chat is, what's your impression of this person that you're in this conversation with? They just put an agenda in front of you, right? It's an agenda that has a goal of clarity. What's your perception now of this person that is selling to you? Go ahead and post that in the chat. How do you feel in this particular moment? Go ahead, write something in. Let's see what you got. They're thoughtful. Yes. Anything else? Seems decent. They're sound. Yeah. In command. At ease. Yes. Reasonable. Yes. All of those things are true. Professional and trustworthy. That is so huge. Think about that. You haven't even started the conversation, and this is the perception that you're setting. You are setting yourself up for success. You are putting down the framework, right, for the sales conversation. And now they're open to your influence. So let me shut the chat here. Hold on, navigating the tech. Turn the video off. There we go. Here's what you've done. You've started to differentiate yourself from any previous experience your potential client has had in a sales conversation. I promise you, no one is sitting down with them and saying the goal of the conversation is clarity. 99% of all people they sit down with don't put down an agenda, and for certain, they're not shooting for clarity. You've made yourself different. You've made yourself stand out. You're immediately in a different position. You're positioned for an effective enrollment conversation. Now, as you look at the slide there, now you can just relax and just be in the conversation. So let's recap. The goal of any sales conversation is not to make a sale. The goal is clarity. And always set a clear agenda at the start of every sales conversation you have. One final piece that we're going to look at, and this piece involves your potential client's reasons for buying from you. I think there is a huge misconception about this, and this is something really key to understand, and it will make a radical difference in your sales conversations when you understand it. And I'm going to tell a personal story that attaches to that. People do not buy the bullet points of your service. This is a real mistake, presenting bullet points of a product, service, or program. Here's an example. Imagine you wanted to get from point A to point B, and there was something that point B you really had to get to. If I had a car that could get you there and I was willing to drive, would you want me to stop to explain every single detail of how the car worked, or would you want me to hop in the car and drive you there? Most people would say they would just want me to hop in the car and drive you there. This is the same thing. when you start going into the details, what you're doing is you're selling the car rather than the destination. I've heard it said, never sell the plane, sell the destination. When you're flying from wherever you are to Hawaii, you're not worried about all the different landmarks that are along the way or how the plane works or all that stuff. You just want to know that you can get from wherever you are to Hawaii. And I want to tell a story about this that really drove this home for me. I bought a high-level mentorship program back in, I think it was 2009. And my mentor at that time had highly recommended that I raise my rates. So he said, I want you to take your rates to 15,000 for 6 months. And as soon as he said that, I thought that, well, if I'm going to raise my rates to 15,000, I have to know every single bullet point that's going to be in this particular program. I've got to have it all detailed. I've got to have it all laid out. And he sat in front of me and he said, no, you don't. You don't need any of that. And I was like, what? Crazy. I thought it was crazy. And then we went back and forth about this. He was saying you don't need the bullet points. I was saying you do. And then he asked me a question that I'll never forget. He said, Chris, you've bought my summit program, and this program was $75,000. It was not a small investment. It was a massive leap of faith on my part to hire this person. And he said, you've bought that program. Tell me what the bullet points are in that program. And I froze. And all of a sudden it was like, tingles of truth. I had no idea. I had some general idea what might have been in it, but I couldn't tell you what the bullet points were because that's not what I purchased. That's not what people buy. So let me turn this off here. Hang on. And if that's not what people buy, waiting for the slide to advance. If that's not what people buy, what is it that they do buy? This is what I want you to write down. They buy that you understand their problem or challenge better than anyone else. I'm going to say that again. They buy that you understand their problem or challenge better than anyone else. And there's a specific way to do this during the sales conversation that focuses you on understanding them. And I'm going to cover that more in next Tuesday's webinar when I cover skill set. For now, just in terms of the mindset piece, your role in the conversation is to focus on understanding them rather than being understood. Most people talk so much during an enrollment conversation. And what you should be doing instead is getting them talking. We want them talking. You should be talking 10% of the time, maybe, and them talking 90%, because then what's happening? You're developing an understanding. A really good sales conversation is one where your potential client gets up from the table and knows, they look across the table and they think, oh my gosh, this person gets me. That's what you're shooting for. This person gets me. If you've done that, you've been incredibly effective. The cool thing about this is it takes all the pressure off you because we want to keep them talking. You're not there selling. You're not there trying to persuade. You're not there trying to push. The conversation becomes much easier when you're not thinking you have to sell your services to a potential client. Sales is not something you do to someone, it's something you do for someone. And say that again. Sales is not something you do to someone, it's something you do for someone. Everybody on this masterclass has a product, a program, a service that can solve a problem for someone else. I want to say that the world needs what you do, and it doesn't matter what you're selling. You could be selling widgets, you could be selling coaches, or selling coaching services. It really doesn't matter. And for me, the truth that underlines all of this, the truth when it comes to sales mastery, is sales as service. You serve the world when you show up fully to sell your services and you put your potential client at the center of how you sell. The sale only gets awkward when we make it about ourselves. Think about that. The sale only gets awkward when we make it about ourselves. When we start to think about what we can get from the sale, that's when it becomes awkward. If we keep it about them, that takes the pressure off. And at the end of the day, if we're not showing up fully to sell our services, the world isn't able to get access to our gifts. And that's what this is all about. So let's recap all the way back to the beginning of the masterclass. Number one, focus on active income first. It's so important. Know and understand the law of polarity. If a problem is present, so too is the solution. Excuse me. Always set a clear agenda at the start of every sales conversation you have. And people do not buy the bullet points of your product, service, or program. They buy that you understand their problem or challenge better than anyone else. And the foundational mindset underneath it all is that sales is service. We talked about the webinar next week. That's Tuesday the 28th, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. UK, 7 p.m. Central Africa time. The URL is www.mysalessuccess.com. When you register, be sure to download the Your Path to Sales Mastery workbook. I'll look forward to seeing you all there. URL again, www.mysalessuccess.com. With all that said, I'm going to turn off the presentation and move into some Q&A.
Wow, I've taken heaps of my notes. Yes, I do have a purple pen. This is just so awesome. Thank you. I know there's so much to share, and you've really just given such. We've just literally started at the tip of the iceberg below, and so I'm so thrilled. I managed to convince you to do 2 masterclasses so we could go deeper at this level. You know, I've realized that more and more as I've really trying to master this area where I'm still completely in kindergarten and just sort of kneel at the feet of mastery. But realize that yes, there are formulas I can follow, there's scripts, and I know you're going to go into a lot more of that in the next masterclass as well in terms of some of those skill sets. And you're also going to come some of these belief sides. And I know that for me, I had a real thing, and still this little monster can come up for me, where I think also because I teach about money, or maybe this is my BS and this is my story about it, this fear of seeming pushy, or fear of people buying from me almost out of obligation, because here's my shit. I know that I've struggled to have good boundaries myself, and I've ended up saying yes to things that didn't serve me. So this way, when I bring my own stuff, so it's interesting when you spoke about how other people bring their past experiences, so the prospects bring that belief. But it's almost, I know that I bring some of my past experiences of where I've said yes in sales conversations that didn't serve me. And so I almost negatively, I wouldn't call it compensate, because compensating implies there's something. So decompensate around that. How do I approach that side? So it's my baggage of shitty sales conversations and not wanting to be seen as pushy or whatever that is side. And just as I said, I realized I got to take, it's not about me, first thing, but some of this stuff. And also, what if a person doesn't have the money and I'm going to put them in a difficult financial position? So there's 2 aspects there.
Well, yeah, I think first of all, it's really going back to the goal is clarity, and what I do is I think about, if I'm really concerned about being pushy, I start to think about, I make it so much bigger than myself. I start to think about, if I'm feeling pushy and I'm not showing up fully, whatever that looks like for me, what's the impact on the world? And I really stay in that zone, because it's so much not about ourselves. And then what I do is I think back to experiences I mean, and I see like miles and miles of testimonials on your website of people whose financial worth is in a completely different situation because you were willing to get uncomfortable and sell them your shit. I mean, let's just be honest. So I tend to think about the impact on the world, and then I tend to revisit the different places where I have maybe asked an additional question and the impact that it had. I mean, I had a situation recently with a client named Isaac, and Isaac was one of the people that came to the call as a no. And I stayed very gentle. One of the keys here in terms of not being pushy is to really control and stay in service to the other person. It's taking yourself out of the picture. Like, this isn't about me collecting money. And I'll even say that out loud because that helps me relax. So I'll even say it. If I'm worried about being pushy, the thing that I would say to everybody in the room, if that is a concern, don't suppress that. Just put it in the room.
Yeah, acknowledge. Oh.
Just say it out loud. Look, I really don't want to be pushy. And the last thing I ever want to do is push you into something that you don't want to do. Just say it out loud. Because if you don't say it out loud, here's what happens. There's a discomfort in you. So there's now an energy in you that is vibrating across the table to your potential client. And if you don't say what that energy is about, that uncomfortable energy, your potential client will pick up that energy, and then they're going to create a story around what that energy is about. Nobody really knows what that energy is about. It just doesn't feel quite right. There's something somewhat inauthentic going on here. I'm not quite sure what that is. And then all of a sudden, you're almost losing trust, and the rapport is getting broken. So with concern about being pushy,
and ironically, even over this conversation, you might end up being pushy.
Yeah, well, right. Just say it. Just say I don't want to be pushy. But
I'm saying, go say it with that negative energy. It can then come out instead of just staying sensitive.
Yes, it comes out in the place it shows up. Here's the place it shows up. It'll show up in tone. It'll show up in your tone of voice. Because most are unconscious in terms of the tonality that they're speaking in. And tonality creates really more influence than the words that you say. So being in proper tone is really important. So if you're concerned about being pushy, again, the solution is to just say that. Because then here's what usually happens. You say, oh my gosh, I definitely don't want to be pushy, and I've got this concern about being pushy. I just really know that I can help you. Then what they'll usually come back with is something like, oh my gosh, you're not being pushy. And they'll say, you're just not pushy at all. And most people that are worried about being pushy don't have a pushy bone in their body. I mean, they're just not pushy at all. Going back to Isaac to finish that story, this really sat with me because here's what happened. He came as a no. I'd put a $60,000 program in front of him. He'd gone, he'd talked to his spouse, and he came back as a no. And the first thing that you want to do, and we'll get into a little bit of it here, and there'll be more next week's webinar, you have to realize when somebody comes as a no, they're coming with a certain level of resistance, right? Mm-hmm. So the first thing that you have to do if you're going to respond to somebody saying no, or you're going to respond to an objection, maybe it's price, or maybe it's I don't have time, I don't have the money, whatever it is, the first thing that you have to do is you have to break the resistance. So you don't respond to the objection right away. The first step is to break the state of resistance that they're currently in. If you respond before you do that, they're not going to really hear and fully embody your response. So you're wasting your time. So the way that you do that is you say they'll object, then they say their objection. And what I said to Isaac when he came as a no is I said, can I ask you a question about that? And he went, yes, you absolutely can. I'd love for you to ask me a question about that. So I started asking him questions about the thinking that was underneath the no. And what ended up happening was he came to this on his own. I didn't tell him this. He saw this on his own. He saw that the same thinking that was being used to make a decision to move forward with me was the exact same thinking that was holding back his business. And I said, what would a more empowered way of thinking look like here? And what would the way of being be that would create a shift for you? And he said, I think I need to sign up with you. And then here's what happened. He signed up. And after he signed up, he said to me, thank you for being a stand for my development.
Oh.
And that man has just recently bought a house. He's generated, my gosh, he hired me 3 months ago. He's generated over 90K already. We've got him selling a high ticket program, which is what he wanted to do. So when I think about situations like that, if I had gone into my own shell and not asked him the question, if my shit got triggered in that moment, that would have had a massive impact on Isaac. So we have to think about, if we're shrinking in some way, what's the impact on our potential clients?
Oh, I love that. I love just so many aspects. Because again, yeah, the impact of, he would still be stuck in that same thinking, in that same side. And I just love what you said there in terms of that. Also, that you know, said so often we want to dive into the objection,
right?
And that level, surface level side, and almost that attack or defensiveness. No, you're right or you're wrong, or just oh well, whatever. But respond to that, and I love how you said, just slow down, stop, because just reminding that they aren't. And I love how you put, it's almost like this resistance. There's a shield up. And so they can't even engage. I love how you put that. You almost go under it and allow that to sort of lift up. God,
yeah.
Beautiful.
Yes, those two questions again. Thanks. It's so juicy.
So Natalie,
I asked him
those two questions again.
It was clear that his current way of thinking, the way he was thinking, was he was using the same thinking to make his decision to work with me that was keeping him stuck in his business. And I said, what would a more empowered way of thinking look like? And then I said, and what would a more empowered way of being look like in this situation? And he just went, oh my gosh. And so here's the thing. I didn't tell him, look, you're thinking about this the wrong way. I asked him a question and he became clear for himself. That's what we're teaching. And next Tuesday, we're going to be diving into that. Just remember, usually 9 times out of 10, the correct way to respond is going to be a question. Okay. It's going to be a question because people have such a high level of resistance to being told anything. And underneath the surface, they know you're trying to sell them something. So they're not going to receive what you're telling them anyway. Well, Isaac, if you hire me, your life's going to change. Well, of course I'm going to say that. I'm sitting here trying to sell services. It's like, is a fish salesman going to run down the street and yell rotten fish for sale? So we're totally wasting our time if we're moving into telling people. We have to ask better questions.
You know, I love, because what it's just made me think about is just where you spoke about really coming, if we truly go into that mindset that wherever a problem exists, there's also a solution.
Yes.
I got a sense as you're speaking about it, you also seem to come with the energy that for every person you're with, the solution is also present within them and for them.
Yeah.
Like, you asking those questions presupposed and let Isaac realize that there was a solution for him already there.
Yes, and because I think because I responded with a question rather than with a speech about why he's thinking wrong, he was actually able to receive the coaching around his current way of thinking, and it became clear for himself, and there was no pushing involved, and that's what I teach.
And so much more generative. I just love that. Oh, yeah. I love where you also spoke about setting that intention when you go into the space. Yes. So do you sometimes actually even write it down? Do you So you set an intent like to, let's say, have a sales conversation, to have how many conversations and all that side. And then do you also set that intention, get clear before you start that conversation?
Yes. Yes, I'm really big on intentionality because it really increases our level of consciousness. So yes, I will write down intentions. It keeps me conscious. It keeps me present. And then, if I'm at a multi-day event, I can check in at lunch, and I can even look, have it on an index card and just look and say, am I in alignment with my intention? How am I being up to this point? How's my being? So I'll also ask myself, when I'll set the intention, I'll then ask myself, what's the way of being that's going to help bring that intention into my experience? And then an answer will always come, and I'll usually document that as well. So I end up conscious of the way of being that needs to be present and that showed up for me in that moment, because usually it's complete truth. And then while I'm at these events, I'm making sure I'm staying in alignment with that. And I do the same thing when I lead retreats. I'll set an intention for myself for a retreat, like how am I going to show up? I'll set an intention for the participants in the retreat, and then I'll set a business intention. And then I'm constantly checking in. I'm so big on intentionality because I think if we don't put an intention out there, the universe doesn't know what to bring us. And we have to show up with the belief that the way the intention can be fulfilled is present, because it changes everything.
When you're at the event, do you literally close the deal there, meaning you get them say yes to a coaching relationship with you for XYZ?
Well, the answer is if you can, if that's a possibility, that's absolutely what you want to do. 110% of the time when you're at an event, there's so much energy at the event. And what can happen, you have a connection with a person, you're in the energy. If you have meetings right there, oftentimes people will sign up right on the spot. I've seen it happen over and over and over again. Here's what happens if you don't do that. If you don't have that happen, you'll say, well, I'll follow up with you. I'll call you and we'll get something set up. Well, guess what? They're gone. They leave the event. They go back to the environment. They go back to all of the things in their environment that are keeping them where they are. Those things have such a tremendous weight that even though they had the best intention, oftentimes the follow-up, and then you feel horrible because now you're chasing. Now you're like, well, they said I could call them. How many times do I call them? Should I call them? So if you can't set up the meeting while you're there, what I would do, what you want to do is get your diary out, get your calendar out, and say, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we connect when you get back? When are you going back? Oh, I'm going back Thursday. Do you want to connect on Monday of next week? Yes. What time do you want to connect on Monday? Okay, let's connect at 10 a.m. And you slot it in. Always remember, we have to be selling the next phase of the process, whatever that is. And the next phase is the meeting. So you're selling the meeting. So that's what you want. You want to get that meeting set. And I'm going to just go off on a little bit of a tangent here. Never, ever, ever leave a sales meeting without having the next meeting set up. This is how you can avoid the chase. So if you have a meeting and a person needs some time and they have to think about it, so on and so forth, say, great, when do you want to connect again? And you get that meeting set. Don't leave without setting the next meeting, because again, you'll move into chasing at that particular point. So if you can, definitely do your meetings at the events. The 60K client I talked about earlier, he signed up while we were there, right in Bali.
Brilliant. And I guess this is this momentum. Keep going. Momentum is so important, because just even the law of physics, you go out of that, the energy needed to get that going again is astronomical. So Marina said, how do you deal with the price aspect? The clients agree they need the solution, but they can't afford it.
All right, it's a tough objection. Yes, it's the most popular one. It's the one you're going to run into the most frequently. So first of all, everybody just know and understand that most people have a really negative association to money going out. So price objection it's common. It does happen. First thing I would look at, though, is what are you doing to create it? Because oftentimes when I'm talking with people about enrollment or I'm hearing their enrollment conversations, there's a lot of different things that are taking place in their conversation that are actually creating the price objection. And that's shocking for people, but it happens constantly. It's part of my teaching. So the first thing is be really honest with yourself. How are you creating the price objection? It's not happening to you. You're creating it. So what's going on in the conversation that's creating it? Now, that's not to say that every single person you sit down with is going to have the money, but we first have to look at ourselves, right? I had this belief that nobody would pay me $15,000. Nobody's ever going to pay me that. The first time I offered it, somebody paid me that, but it took me months and months and months and months to spit the number out, right?
Just even to get that offer.
Right, just to make the offer. So there's a lot of different things with price objection. So first of all, I look at the rapport that I have with a person. Is this a really good ideal situation, really good potential client? Because how far I'll go to overcome price objection is very individual. If it's a total ideal fit, I'll go a long way in terms of trying to respond to it and overcome it. If the energy is not quite right, I won't go quite as far to do that. But the way to do it is, again, remember, the answer is always going to be questions. So the way to control price objection is to realize this. Price is only expensive because it's being compared to something else. Price is expensive because it's being compared to something else. When I'm teaching sales mastery, what I'm teaching is how do you, in your enrollment conversation, play a role in what people are comparing you to? Because what they're comparing you to is what's creating the objection. I don't believe myself that price objection is about money. I actually believe that price objection is about urgency. Because I'd be willing to guess if I said to all of you in this room, if I said, look, we're in a life-threatening situation. Our life is on the line, and I need each and every one of you to find $5,000. And I need you to find it by the day after tomorrow. Everybody on this masterclass could probably find the 5K. Why? Because it's urgent. So it's knowing and understanding that urgency is really what's going on here. So what I'll do in terms of response, you start with a question. You want to make sure that throughout the enrollment conversation, the person has become incredibly present to what's possible if they hire you, but they've also become very present to what's at risk if they don't hire you. And it's that gap in between what's at risk if they don't hire you and what becomes possible if they do hire you that creates the amount of influence or the amount of urgency that a person needs to make an investment. So what I'll do is I'll take them back into the conversation and I'll say back to them some of the things that they said about what was possible for them if they were to hire me, and also what was at risk if they wouldn't hire me. And once they hear those things back, oftentimes they'll shift their energy, shift their decision, because now they've become clear and they've started comparing the investment to what's possible and comparing the investment to what will likely happen if they don't step forward. So there's a lot there. I hope that's really, really helpful, trying to give you something you can take away. But I could teach for probably 10 hours on price objection. So I hope that.
And I think it's so key. And I think the first one, and I know I've had to work on, I'm sure Marina, everybody else has. Firstly, again, it's that below the surface, our own belief. If we're not really, really, don't focus on ourselves, not about getting money, truly sink into the value. And you said, when you also spoke about people don't buy the bullet points.
Yes.
And this is something I've had to really, really work on, where it's so tempting to go, try and sell bullet points, the nuts and the bolts and the tires, rather than that destination. That
right.
Really, if a person can't understand, because you then spoke the next section here, which is so key, about asking those questions, so people comparing the price or what they believe is the value of what they're going to get and the value of what they could lose.
Right.
And that would be the comparison. But if they're comparing it to a series of bullet points, then you're making your offering about the tin of baked beans, not about the feast.
Yeah, they're buying a result. Like, what result can you help them get? That's really what they want. They don't want the bullet points at all. And more than anything, everybody wants to be understood. And when they feel like you get them, you're totally set up to get a sale. I mean, that's so incredibly important. Usually the ratio, as I said in the masterclass, is way off. Most people that are selling are talking 90% of the time, and they're listening 10% when it really should be opposite. So I see there. What's
clear what people want. So Natalie said, what strategies do you do to prep yourself before your calls to help you get in the right mindset? And I guess, and this is where, just for everybody, for this masterclass and coming to the next one, I think when we're all speaking sales, we might be talking about services, but quite frankly, this is getting your kids to eat their broccoli, or we're talking about influence. We're talking about if you've got a mission, if you're trying to get people to contribute to something, their time, their energy, it doesn't matter what it is, the same foundations apply, and it starts with who you are being. So let's talk about this. Who do we need to be, Chris?
Well, what I'll usually do, again, is I'll set an intention for the meeting, and then I'll ask myself, what way of being needs to be present for me to fulfill this intention? And there'll be an answer that shows up for me. And then I'll detail for myself what that way of being would look like. It might be being powerful. It might be staying confident. It might be staying bold. I don't know. Whatever it is that comes up for me in that particular situation.
Fine. So you don't have this rigid thing, I'm powerful beyond measure, like routine. You rarely allow it to be that intention for that session.
No, and what I tend to do is, and this is what works for me, I am such a better influencer or seller when I'm in heart energy instead of head energy. So one of the things that I'll really try to do before a conversation is really take the time to actually get into my body and get into my heart space and get into that place of absolute service. That is so incredibly important for me, is to present from here. And one of the ways that you can do that is make sure when you're in your enrollment conversation that you're in that open space. I never present my services from a seated position. You'll also notice that I'm standing for this, because this is confident body language. Always remember that mind and body are connected. They operate in what's called a cybernetic loop. And what that means is one impacts the other. So what's going on in the mind will impact the body. What's going on in the body or with the body will impact the mind. So in terms of one of the things you can do that's really simple to prep yourself and make sure that you're in a good mindset is put your body in a confident body language. Because really think about how hard it is. If you stand up straight and you put your chin up and you put your chest out and you're in that confident body language, immediately your mind links that to a confident state. So just being in that body language is going to create a totally different energy. Make sure you're not presenting from a collapsed position. Make sure you're not presenting from a seated position. Make sure you're not closed like this. So body language, really, really important. The other thing here that's a lot of fun to do, and I do this with some of my one-to-one clients, is know and understand, when we go right back to that law of polarity, if we have lack of confidence, what else do we have? Confidence. We've got confidence. So what I've had clients do is actually create a little bit of a character that they choose to show up as when they go sell. Like your confident character. What does your confident character wear? What does your confident character think about money? How would your confident character approach selling? How would your confident character be when they were approaching an enrollment conversation? It's a lot of fun, but it's something that can allow you to just tap into that. Because again, if you have lack of confidence, you've got a part of yourself that's also incredibly confident, and that's the part that you want to bring to the meeting. You've just got to bring that part out, and it helps to define that part and become familiar with it and say, what would it wear? What's in its closet? That kind of thing. And then just grab that character and go off to your sales meeting.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I've seen the time. Gosh, you've been so generous already. And we've got the juicy second part of the masterclass, the next aspect where I know there's some super exciting things there. You know, Chris has already shared with me some of what he's doing, and I've obviously already heard him speak and training elsewhere, and he's got some amazing, incredible nuggets. So this is things like just powerful, some of the scripting to really slam dunk these things home. We're going to be sharing that with you. You've got this 5-step strategy you're going to be covering in there.
Salesman blueprint. They'll leave with a blueprint for the entire conversation. It's great.
Yeah, which is just so key. And we're going to be diving more into this mindset stuff. So what's so great with the foundation that's set tonight. So jump in, join us there. Thank you for your amazing time. Feel so grateful to you. And we'll see you again real soon.